So the next topic that we wanted to bring up was just the issue of responsibility. We see people on the streets and we wonder, how do they get there, and what choices did they make that landed them in that situation, and how to navigate all the complexities of what's happened in their life, and where they are and why. And so you've got a really good example of maybe what that looks like, and a kind of an analogy of a suitcase. So could you kind of run through that for us?
Yeah. So one of the ways I've kind of come to think about this is if you're, if your life is like driving a car, and you make choices, you take turns, you go down different roads, right? And if you find yourself, or if an individual person finds themselves a scary dead end street, right? Nowhere else to go, and they're in trouble. Like, it's not a good place. Not the dead end street you want to get stuck in. What should a person do at that stage, right? Well, if they're in the driver's seat, you could make a lot of recommendations. We turn the car around and you go in a different direction. Even a dead end street, you've got turns you can make, right? You can make choices. You can turn around and you can get out of there. But if you're not in the driver's seat, maybe you're a piece of luggage in the trunk, you're stuck. You don't have a lot of options there. And I think that oftentimes we treat people that way when we start getting involved in the messiness of helping them, or the messiness of their life, that they are in a bad situation, they're experiencing homelessness or some similar set of circumstances, and instead of interacting with them and treating them like they're in the driver's seat, a lot of the solutions that we offer them treat them like they're in the passenger seat, or they're actually a piece of luggage back in the trunk of the car. We take away their responsibility, and we try to fix things for them, or we do things to them. And so I think it's really understandable why we want to do that, because the danger, I guess, or the risk of affirming that somebody is responsible for the choices that will get them out of the dead end that they're in. The danger of that is coming across as judgmental, right? Or victim blaming. Like, you're in this dead end because it's your fault, right? And I think we have this like proper sense of caution or fear when it comes to making a statement like that. But if we don't affirm that, if we don't say, in some sense, this person is going to be responsible, even if they are not responsible for where they ended up, they are going to need to take responsibility for getting out. If you don't say that, you are in a certain fundamental way, I would say, denying their humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And then there's an opposite side of that pendulum too, where if you are completely putting it on them as their responsibility, everything that's happened to them is because they made that choice. Well, that's also not completely true. We all have different backgrounds. We've all been raised in different ways. We've come up. Some of us have had more opportunities than others, and so there is an element of lack of control that's there. But ultimately, and when you're sitting at the end of that dead end street, the only person that can be responsible is you. Whether or not you got there on your own, it really doesn't matter. That's where you are, and that has to be addressed at some level. And so we do have to strike the balance between saying, yes, it is your responsibility from this position that you're in. We recognize that you didn't have control over everything. You didn't have control over the dog that ran in front of you, or that pothole you hit, or whatever it was along the way. But here you are, and to help people recognize that in a non-judgmental way, where we can say, yes, you are here somewhat, at least by your own choice, but and it's bad, but there's hope. You're not stuck here.
That's right.
And I think what we get wrong when we say, well, this person, it all happened to them, it wasn't their fault at all that they're here. We really kind of deny the hope that they have to get out of it, because what we're telling them is that they're incapable. of getting out of that situation. And I think that's what we see in a lot of large scale programs where we basically treat people as if they're in the situation that they're in, they're never going to get out, and we just have to sort of keep them alive and somewhat happy, and that's all we can do. That's not dignifying either. And so you're looking at these two ends of the pendulum where you're either completely judging somebody for what they've done and they're stuck there and they're on their own and they need to figure it out and bootstrap their way up, or they're not at fault at all. And it's up to us to just kind of try to make them comfortable and not expect anything out of them. Neither one of those is dignifying. And so, like, how can we look at a person who's in a situation caused by some of their own choices and some of the factors that they've just come up through providentially? How do we strike a good balance, and what should we do in that?
Yeah, great question. I think two of the most helpful questions that I've learned to ask someone who finds himself in that situation are these. First, as somebody tells you, kind of the story of their life so far, just ask, how's that working out? How's it working out? And if somebody, as this happens often, someone might say it's working out great, right? I'm good, right? And so if they don't see a problem, or you might think this person's life is definitely at a dead end, or they've taken a bunch of wrong turns and they're in a bad neighborhood at least, right? But if in their mind things are working out fine, and there's you may see all of those issues, but if they don't see them, you need to find out fast, right? Because if we start trying to solve problems for somebody, and this isn't just true, I think of homeless ministry, it's true of all kinds of ministry, all kinds of life. If you try to solve problems in a person's life that's not your own, if you try to solve problems that they don't recognize, you're not gonna fix the problems, right? You may try to do a bunch of things to them or on their behalf, but they're not gonna last, and they're not gonna change. So that's the first, I think, helpful question you can ask somebody is, how are things? How's that working out? The second question, which I think is really powerful, is, what do you want to do next? Because it cuts through all of the complexity and the murkiness of whose fault is it, right? Somebody may be at this dead end street, and most of the things that led them there weren't their fault, right? Maybe they were born into a bad family, ended up in foster care, dealt with a bunch of institutional racism, developed a mental illness that they had no control over, and by the time they're 25 years old, like, things have just slid so far off down the hill that there they are, right? All of that can be true. And in some cases it is true. All of that can be true, but because at the core of what we want to do is affirming that a person is made in the image of God, affirming their humanity, there is always that question, what do you want to do next? Where do you want to go from here? And affirming that with that question, but also putting them back in the driver's seat, as it were, of saying, I actually honor you and respect you enough to care about what you want to do next. And then you're going to have to make up your mind about what that is. And so one of the principles that always runs through my head is never do anything to or for people. Do things with them. So that means it's their plan and you're just helping. And then along the way, you might be literally with them, sitting at the DMV, waiting to get a driver's license, doctor's office appointments, whatever it might be. Or it means that you're just, you're a friend, you're an ally, you're a family member, right, who's going to say, as you're on this journey, like, I'll be on, you got my phone number, we can talk it through. Like, I'll go to your appointments with you, or but when it comes down to it, reaffirming over and over and over again that I really do believe that you are another human being. You're not a piece of luggage. You're not another transaction on my to-do list. But just like me, just like all of us, we have a part to play in our own lives. Yeah. And it's risky, right? Because the dark side of responsibility is judgment. And we don't want to come across as judgmental, and we certainly don't like feeling judged ourselves. But the only way to get out of that kind of judgment is to get rid of responsibility. And if you get rid of responsibility, then you really are, like you're saying, you may be in a very hopeless situation because you're out of control.
Yeah, I think a way to mitigate some of the feeling of judgment that comes when we are speaking to the issue of personal responsibility in these cases is the whole idea that we're trying to really hammer down, is that this is about walking with somebody. And walking with somebody is not just you facilitating their wishes, or are you trying to, help them make that next step, but it's deeper than that. It's relational. It's the vulnerability for you to confess and admit that you also have sin in your life and that you also need Christ, and that that you understand that yes, they have made these choices and are responsible for them, but that you understand and can relate that you also have a sin nature, and that you are capable of everything that they have done. So I think that you can really empathize with the person while addressing those things in a truthful way and in a helpful way, without being judgmental in a way that would make them feel like you don't love them. I think there's a way to judge a situation and to judge an action at face value in a loving way, and I think that requires relationship. All of these things we've talked about, asking those questions. I love that, starting with asking questions of the person, because too often we see a situation and we look at it, we say, I know the answer to that. I know what that needs. That guy needs a shower and a phone and a night in a hotel and a resume, and then no more. He's not gonna be homeless anymore. And we're wrong 99% of the time. And we're always wrong if our answer is something that the person doesn't want. And so I think that's such a dignifying thing, and it's such a simple thing just to say, how's this current life situation going for you? Asking for an honest answer. I think it takes relationship to get an honest answer from that, because if you just meet them and it's your first time to talk to them, you say, hey, how's this going for you? I'm fine. They're not going to tell you anything deep unless they know you. And then, beyond that, what's the next step for you? Or what do you want to do next? I think that's such an awesome thing that they probably don't even think about a lot of times. Just thinking of my friends and how immediately focused they are on things that they've got to do next, like that day. And thinking about anything into the future it's just not really on the radar. But allowing the person the dignity to think forward and to dream and to have that glimmer of hope, that's you saying that you have hope for that person. Like there is something next. And I think that is an empowering thing for that person to hear from someone else, is that you believe that there is hope. You know that there can be something else, and that opens up just a small little crack in the door for them to recognize that they don't have to be where they are, and that you're with them and for them. And then as they take those thoughts and think about, okay, well, how can we actually do this? That's where we can step in and say, oh, you want to work in an office as a secretary, but you don't have typing skills. Well, let's try to connect you to a resource that will help you to learn how to type if that's what you want to do. That's where we can be a broker of resources without being a kind of a savior complex where we're prescribing those solutions to people. So, but actions come from somewhere else, right? Or the way that we act is not it's not its own standalone deal. There's a deeper thing that drives our actions. In fact, there's several layers that drive our actions. So Could you speak to that? Like maybe how do you get from action and this personal responsibility idea? How do you drill deeper into that to make a difference?
Yeah, so I think there's a bunch of different ways we could break it down biblically, but one of the more helpful ways, I think, is seeing that at the surface, like what we see and what we interact with other people, but also in our own lives, are our actions or behaviors. And that's all we kind of see, and that's all we interact with. But biblically speaking, underneath that, the Bible talks about our desires. So our desires become actions. But even underneath that, we have our thoughts, right? What are we thinking about? What are we meditating on? And even underneath that is what Scripture calls the heart, which is in some ways all of those things all mixed up together, but it's the core of who we are. And it's very tempting to separate those things from each other, right? So we love to think, I love to think about myself as a basically really good person that sometimes acts in these really bad ways, and maybe a little bit more frequently has some questionable desires, and a little bit more frequently has some bad thoughts. But my heart is good. It stays the same. And it's a bit shocking and painful to find that Jesus says, no, that's actually not the case, Raymond. That's not how you work. That's not how anyone works. In Mark 7, he tells his disciples that it's not what goes into a person that corrupts them, but it's actually what comes out of the heart. It's out of the heart of men and women come all of our evil thoughts and desires and our actions. And so unless the heart is transformed, none of those other things can be transformed as well. And so I think that's a really crucial piece, that if we're going to, because as we've been talking about, we want to say, well, I want to affirm the humanity of other people. I want to give people, I want to treat them with dignity and respect. I want to interact with them as if they are, in some sense, using our illustration, in the driver's seat of their own life. I want to do all of that. And then we get to what Jesus tells us about where all of that comes from. And so it's a heart issue, ultimately. And this is something, I talk with people a lot about, and people that are on the streets or coming off the streets or coming out of an addiction or at all different stages of life. It's a liberating thought because we know that by the power of God's grace and by the power of the gospel, our hearts can be transformed. But it's also a scary thought because it means that the problem with me is actually me, right? It's in Raymond. It's in my heart, and that heart has to be transformed. And so once again, though, it brings us back to kind of a theme that I think we want to have running through all of these sessions, and that's that the transformative power of the gospel is not secondary to changing all of these other areas of our life that we want changed, right? So if Jesus is to be believed, I cannot fully change my actions or my desires or my thoughts without my heart being transformed. So if my life has, in some sense or to some degree, come off the rails, I can't set it right without his help. I can't just modify my behavior or my desires enough to actually experience true transformation unless something is transformed in my heart. Mm-hmm. And I can't do that for somebody. You can't do that for somebody. Nobody can do it. It is literally a miracle that comes by the gift of the Holy Spirit, by the gift of faith and regeneration and all of these things that we usually associate with salvation. We should, right? But once again, thinking about salvation as just what happens to you after you die is just such an abbreviated and incomplete way of thinking about what salvation is. Because if salvation is a transformation of the heart, and the heart directs all of those other parts of our life, then we should be able to say confidently to each other, whether and to somebody who's on the street or not, that the power of God's grace in your life will translate out into all of these other areas of your life. So you will experience a difference in the way that you think. You will experience a difference in what you desire. You will experience a difference in the way you behave. And if any of those things have contributed to the hardship that someone's experiencing, and they have, because it's true for all of us, if any of those things have contributed to their hardship, then the transformation of their heart through the gospel will lead them to an end of those hardships, right? And it's not overnight. It's not, snap your fingers. You accepted Jesus, and now your problems are gone. But it's really liberating and hopeful, even if it's really scary. And said the wrong way comes across as a little judgmental.
Yeah. I think about just our own lives and how we can know 10 different steps to take to have a better marriage or something like that. We can do these behavior modifications that have positive reinforcement from the society, and it helps us to get along. But we can still just be so broken inside, and behind closed doors in our heart, there's so much mess. So what we don't want to happen is for us just to tidy up our friends so that they can get along in the world and have a decent life and die and not know Christ. Like, that's the worst case scenario. That's the least loving thing I could do for somebody, is to never let them know about the best news that there is. And in our own relationships with God, we want to obey Him. We want to do the things that He wants us to do. We want to love the things that He loves, and that's a struggle. But I found, at least for myself, and I think we could look at this across the board, is that taking those actions and bootstrapping our way to try to obey God is not what He wants from us. Mm-hmm. He's not looking for us to follow an instruction manual to check the boxes and so that we are accepted by Him. But in fact, He accepts us already and welcomes us into His family after being enemies of His, and gives us His name. And I think looking at that and really just delighting in that is what changes our behavior and changes the way that we think and changes the way that we live. And that's what we need. We need to delight in God and to love Him and to be changed by Him, and then the actions of our lives change. And so, I think it is a hopeful thing to think about that in terms of working with the homeless, to recognize that we're limited in what we can do. There is a point to which we cannot affect their heart. We can tell them things. We can share the gospel with them. We can give them truth. But ultimately, that heart change is dependent on the Lord. And that is a freeing thing, but sometimes it is a frustrating thing, because you're like, man, I just wish that if this person would have a change of heart, then everything in their life would change, and we wouldn't have to be trying to work from the bottom up. We're working at baseline behavior modification, not to spit in public trash cans or something, just not to get in trouble. Rather, if it were coming from the other end and flowing down, that's the way that God has designed it. And so I think it's important to recognize that in our ministries, that ultimately what we want is heart change, and we are not capable ourselves of causing that. So that makes us dependent and weak, which is good. I think that motivates us to pray, and I think that as we pray for our neighbors, that we just want so badly for them to know Christ and to have those changes that affect their life. It opens our eyes and our hearts for opportunities where we can be representatives of Christ in their life. Like if you're praying for somebody and you're like, God, I really wish that this person would know you, and I want them to know the love and the grace that comes with being a child of God. And then as you're doing that, your heart's just inclined toward that person, and it gives you the eyes and the heart to see when you can step in and show that love and grace to them. So I think that's critical for us as practitioners to constantly be in prayer for our people. that just drives what we do.
Absolutely. And I think practically too, it leads us to wisely, cautiously, but bravely affirm the humanity of everyone, including people that are living with very difficult circumstances. And so when we're talking about people experiencing homelessness or people that are in extreme poverty, I mean, I think this applies to overseas missions as well, or basically anybody who we're more inclined to think of as less than human, in the sense that we don't affirm their humanity. Be brave in granting a person the dignity of their own of the responsibility for if not what's happened to them, at least what's going to happen next. Right? So affirming that in our ministries and in our work, and then structuring things in such a way that we aren't just saying that, or it's not just a principle, but it's actually something we put into practice. Like we've talked about, doing work with people, whether they're doing a resume or job applications or just anything that's having to do with the computer. And it's like, you can know, if I was doing this myself, I could get it done in about, 5 minutes. But with someone who's maybe not as computer literate, it's going to take 2 hours and it's going to be a hassle and I'm going to have to sit here the whole time. But it's worth it, right? It's worth it because the job is not just, let's finish this task or like get the resume written or the bank account set up. That's not the job. The job is that this person would learn how to do it, and that I can walk alongside of them. I can go with them down that road, but because I love them, and because I affirm them, and because I want to instill a sense of dignity and self-worth in them, I'm going to let them do it themselves. And then I think the other thing too that, as you were talking, that occurs to me as practical is that, especially in our churches, but certainly in our organizations, that if we really take Jesus seriously, that we should not expect someone who we know needs the gospel. We cannot expect that person to have the outer life all straightened up and cleared out and tidied up before some work gets done in the inner life. And I think a lot of Christians might hear that and say, well, yeah, of course I believe that. But think about that, as like, in real time on a Sunday morning. If someone shows up to your congregation, or someone shows up in your waiting room or your lobby or whatever it is, and they externally are obviously a bit of a mess, right? How do we react to them? Do we see that as an opportunity for the gospel to come to bear in somebody's life who needs it? Or do we see that's just scary, or that's just this is a problem, right? And I think a lot of times we structure our lives that way, where we say, until somebody is fixed on the outside, then I don't want to get into the mess of what's in the inside. Or until somebody's cleaned up on the outside, they might not even feel welcome coming to, say, a church service or something like that, where more of like the heart issues or the soul issues are going to be dealt with. And we kind of put the whole thing, we go the whole thing backwards, right? So those are just some sort of practical considerations that, came to my mind as you were talking. What are some other ways you think you can practically put what we've been talking about into practice?
Well, I think just recognizing that there is not a quick and easy solution to a person and their issues, no matter what they are, homeless or not. When it's an issue of the heart, it is a long and sometimes painful process. And so I think embracing that as somebody who is trying to walk with somebody through that is really important. To recognize that it's not about the number of people that you can change or help, but it's about going deep with the person that God has put in front of you and called you to. It's about going as far as you can into their life towards their heart, and then praying that God would get to the heart. That there would be that opportunity for one of your seeds to be planted and to grow. So I think it's just recognizing that sometimes, oftentimes, all the time, this kind of ministry is not an immediate gratification type of thing. And when it comes to working with people, it's just not ever.
Practically speaking, that quality is a lot more important than quantity.
Absolutely.
Is what I'm hearing you say, because it is about the quality of an individual's life that's what we're really trying to bring some lasting change in, and the danger, I think, of the quantity approach is it's really fun, it's easy, it's easy to raise money for. There's also all these reasons why quantifiable approaches to material problems are so appealing to us. I mean, our culture, our society is just geared towards it. Pounds of food given away, numbers of meals served, backpacks handed out, before the school year starts, shoes at Christmas time, right? We're really familiar with all those kinds of programs because it's really easy to measure success. On the organizational side, it's really easy to raise money for because you have a very real thing that you can ask people for and they feel good about giving it. And it feels like, or it even looks like, you're meeting a need. Great photo opportunity. The problem with it, though, is if you think about, especially if you're talking about poverty alleviation or dealing with homelessness, the higher the quantities is an indicator of the higher the need, not the greater the solution. So the person who's going to get you the highest numbers is the person who's in the most trouble. And if that person's needs were met, and if that person was truly helped, your numbers would drop, right? And so that actually, can be really deceptive in terms of how we measure our success or how we measure our helpfulness, because it means if you're just being driven by the numbers and having big numbers, in a kind of an upside down, kind of twisted way, we're motivated by maintaining the need rather than meeting it. Right? If all the people who are food insecure got helped to such a degree that they were no longer, experiencing food insecurity, then your numbers would drop. The bottom would drop out. You'd have nothing. And so I think organizations that kind of build themselves to be driven by that kind of model or that kind of ministry can end up in this really kind of sad place where, for their own survival, to raise funds or to have a mission or to do anything, they actually have to maintain the need instead of solving it. And so if our goal is really to solve the problem, then we have to be looking at more than just how many transactions can we accomplish. We actually have to be thinking about, the question is not how many of these transactions can we keep accomplishing. The question rather should be, how do we make sure that we don't have to do any more of these transactions again, right? Let's eliminate the need for that at all. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it goes back to the whole idea of relationship. If you're volunteering for an organization that's very transactional, yeah, it probably feels good. It doesn't cost you much. You might have to throw some money towards some toys or something else, but it hasn't asked you to give yourself. And I think that's just a really important thing that we want to think about in how we are designing our practices or encouraging people to serve, is that giving yourself is the first and foremost thing. We talked about in session 1 that the very first thing we can do is seek to befriend people. That is the baseline for acknowledging their humanity, their dignity, and everything else. And so we do have to evaluate what our programs are doing, and are they transactional? And I think just having a couple years under our belt at the Field's Edge, it's very easy for a program that started out well with the right heart motivations to get down to the heart level to help somebody, can really easily drift toward a transaction as they grow. And you start to get concerned about tasks over people because it just grows. So I think it's an important question to constantly ask yourself: is what I'm doing transactional, or is what I'm doing affirming the dignity and value of the person that I'm looking to serve and lift up? Mm-hmm. So that's something that I think is a really important application for us.
Yeah, and designing your programs and your mission and your activities accordingly. So not just trying to think how can we inject some more opportunities for relationship into these transactions, but actually saying we want to design the whole things in a different way. Like, how do these facilitate relationship? How do these facilitate instilling dignity in people? How are we affirming not just our love and our care and concern for the individuals we're trying to help, but how do we actually affirm that they are responsible and they have volition and that they are they're in the driver's seat as much as is possible. They're in the driver's seat of the car of their life. And so designing things and facilitating things that don't just accidentally do that, but are designed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think something that's hard about that is that sometimes when you're helping somebody in that way and you're trying to help them recognize that they're in the driver's seat, that sometimes you have to be sort of the bad guy in a sense. Like, you have to be the one, hopefully with enough relational capital, to tell the person that, like, hey, like, you're gonna have to do something about this. And so I found it as a person involved in this type of ministry, like, one of the most difficult times is when you are doing everything you can in your power to help somebody, and they're also fighting you on the other end. And that's something that I guess just God is using to instill patience and trust in Him. I've seen those situations come through to the other side where the person does take that responsibility and recognize, oh yeah, I do need to do something about that. But we have to have the courage to tell the truth in a loving way. But that also puts us at risk for kind of receiving the negative feedback from that.
Yeah. I have a vivid memory of an interaction just like that with a person who I'd known for enough time. We had the relational capital, but they were trying to get on Social Security disability for low self-esteem, which I didn't know. I actually still don't know. Maybe that's a thing. Maybe it isn't. But I asked them why do you feel badly about yourself? Why do you have low self-esteem? Or some kind of question like that. And they started listing off a bunch of things, like I don't have a job, and I smoke too much weed, and I drink too much cheap booze, and I've got a abusive partner who I spend too much time with, and they happen to smoke too much weed and not have a job and drink too much cheap booze, and all of my friends are doing the exact same thing, and and the list goes on and on and on. And I, because I had the relational capital, I was able to say, well, those are actually all really good reasons to not feel good about your life. Like, you're not crazy. In other words, you're not mentally ill because you have low self-esteem, because you don't enjoy doing those things that you just listed off. Mm-hmm. Your mind is working. You're sane. That's good news.
Yeah.
Because if you were doing all of those things and didn't feel any different, or were happy with your life, I would be a lot more worried for you at that point. I said, "What have you ever thought about getting a little part-time job, spending a little bit less time with the abusive partner, drinking a little bit less, smoking a little less weed, spending a little less time with the same group of friends that are just doing all the same things?" And we're not talking like nuclear option, like change your whole life now and become a model citizen, but just like all those things that you listed as being things that are contributing to your unhappiness. Just do all of them a little bit less and see what happens. Mm-hmm. I actually don't remember how things turned out for them long term. But I do remember in the middle of that conversation, a couple of things. One, I don't know if anyone had ever had that kind of a frank conversation with them, and so there was a sense of shock and a little bit of a sense of feeling judged and being under the microscope a little bit. But also, I could see in that conversation, and I do remember now as things played out, that the fact that they had some say in what they were going to spend their life doing, and that those things were directly contributing to their mental health and their experience of happiness, was liberating, right? And because I had the social capital, because I was, as you said, because the friendship was there, that was a little bit of a harder conversation. Because the really abbreviated way you could put it is, I had said, you've got low self-esteem because your life really isn't worth living. And so if you want to feel better about yourself, you're going to have to change. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the hard kernel of the truth. Now you got to walk that out over, 10, 15, 20 minutes of conversation, mm-hmm. and do it within the context of a friendship. But
even in the context of a friendship, that's not good news. It's only good news in the context of the gospel,
right? Where
you're saying this life that you have is not good. These choices that you're making are not good. They're contributing to the life that you're not happy about. And I'm not sitting here telling you to take all these steps to clean up your life and just blindly and dutifully obey. I'm telling you that there's somebody who can make you want to do different things and can change your heart to not have a life like this any longer. Now, that's the good news. It's not good news if you're just just reminding the person of their crummy condition. But it's good news if you remind them of their crummy condition and tell them that you know someone who can alleviate that crummy condition and change their heart.
That's right. That's exactly right. And it's just like if you went to the hospital with some mysterious illness that you knew you were dying from, you're miserable and you're in pain. A couple of bad things could happen, right? You could go in and you could meet with a doctor, and they would say, you describe all of your problems to them, and they just say, like, hey man, like, I'm not going to judge you. We're not about that. I mean, you'd be hopeless, right? It's like, something's wrong. And you need someone to identify it, right? So that's the first way that, a doctor could be really unhelpful. Hey man, no judgment in this hospital, right? You go find a different hospital. But the second thing that could go really wrong is that the doctor does tell you exactly what's wrong and offers you no solution, mm-hmm. right? Which is what you're talking about. It's maybe slightly better than the first scenario, but it's still hopeless. Hey, here's your diagnosis. We can't do anything, right? But what you're saying is that the full gospel says we are going to be brave enough to diagnose the problem, and loving enough to offer you the true antidote, the true solution, the true treatment, right? And so as bad as this thing is that is killing you, there is a way out. There is hope, right? But you have to do all of that together. Otherwise, I would say you're not really in the fight. You're not really addressing the reality of the situation.